The Who the Folk podcast is sponsored by Jewfolk Inc., which is hosting its first in-person fundraising event, Folkfest, on October 30th at Minnesota Hillel. From music and art to food and fun, Folkfest 22 will be a celebration for you. In order to celebrate the 10,000 Ways to be Jewish, Folkfest will have an array of activities, including fun for the family, hands-on crafts, and interesting speakers. The festival will culminate with a special acoustic solo concert from Minnesota's own Peter Himmelman. For more information and to buy your tickets, go to tcjewfolk.com/folkfest. Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week is part one of our first ever two-part Who the Folk interview with local muckraking journalist Scott Rosenberg. In today's part one, we talk about the origin of his blog, Failed Messiah, which he sold 6 years ago to a holding company, the early days of blogging, and where his interest in Ethiopian Jewry started from on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Also, a quick note, this interview has been edited for length and clarity. Scott Rosenberg, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Shana Tova to you. I know we're a couple weeks into the new year here, but hope your year is starting off fairly well.
I think so. I have long COVID, but other than that, it's going pretty well.
Other than the health stuff, then everything's good. So a lot of people might not there are plenty of people who might recognize the name Scott Rosenberg. There are many people who might also recognize your name as Shamaria Rosenberg, your Hebrew name. You at one point in time had been the creator and lead author, journalist, muckraker, many have called you, of the blog Failed Messiah. And I was wondering, just by way of history for people who may not know, what was it that drove you to start that blog several years ago?
It was 2004. I guess a combination of I was being pressured to start it, and I was dumb enough to give in to the pressure, basically. The whole reason it started is that I had written a very detailed letter to the late Lubavitcher Rebbe when he was still alive, obviously, in the 1980s about saving Ethiopian Jews. And he had apparently written a response to me, but I never got it. But the response was still in the files, and a Chabad magazine, the leading one in the world, called Kfar Chabad, printed the letter that the Rebbe wrote to me, translated into Hebrew. And so it printed it, and I saw it for the first time in early 2004, and realized immediately that there were tremendous problems with it. And other people in the Chabad community were pushing me to put the letter that I had written to the Rebbe, and I still had a copy of, to put that up on the web so that people could see this together and understand what had happened. Because it's a weird thing if you're not part of a Hasidic group, but it's like a combination of a draconian cult where you can never say anything bad about the leader, and at the same time, people who are very attached to history and want every little fragment of everything saved and available so that they can look at it. They might deny what it means. They might do other things with it that are strange, but they want it there. So in the process of all of this happening, a friend of mine in the community had copies of everything that I'd given him to look at, and he's basically said, "Look, if you don't put this on the web by Monday, I'm going to do it myself, and you won't have any control over it." And I said, "I don't know how." This tells you. I had no idea. He said, "Why don't you put it up on a blog?" And I said, and I'm not joking now, I said, "What's a blog?"
2004 seems so long ago in that regard, right?
Yeah, what's a blog? So he tells me to look at the blog Protocols, which was the seminal muckraking Jewish blog published by five guys from Yeshiva University, one of them being Stephen I. Weiss, who went on to write for various publications and had news for a Jewish cable thing. I forget what he's doing now, but he did a lot of good work. And they were doing a lot of investigative stuff related to YU, and they started doing a little child sex abuse stuff generally in the Jewish community. Related to the Baruch Lanner story, primarily, I think. Anyway, so I looked at that, saw what it was, fell in love with what the concept of it was, didn't want to do it because that already existed, and said to my friend, "Okay, I see what you want me to do here, but I don't want to have a site like that. I don't want to do that, even though I have a journalism background. I don't want to do it." He said, "Well, you don't have to do it. You can just put up one post with the documents, and that's all you ever have to do." So, and he said, just do it, and this is how you do it, and you've got this number of hours left, and if you don't, I'm going to do it, and then whatever happens with this stuff happens. It's going to be under my control and not yours. And this was after a month, I should add, of me refusing to do it. So I said, okay, and I did it. And then very quickly, I realized that the idea that you could just have one post up there with a couple of documents on it, and it would stay forever or even for a few months, wasn't etched in stone. And that nobody knew what Blogger, which was then the big company for blogs, and it wasn't owned by Google yet. And
Right.
no one knew what they were going to do. They had no policy that really was set in stone, and you didn't know if your post was going to be there in the morning, let alone if it was going to be there in a week. And once it was up there and people were interested in seeing it, it was creating a lot of talk in the Chabad community and also in other parts of the Orthodox community. I thought I've got to put some more stuff up just to show some activity so that Blogger doesn't take it down. And I looked around, and there were a handful of blogs out there at that point, really. And I looked to see how often they posted and what they did. And then I thought if I did 3 or 4 posts a week, it would be okay. I looked around for something to post and found a news story about, I think it was Chabad Messianists in France doing something crazy or whatever. So I put that up. And not the whole thing. I mean, it's linked to it. And now the whole thing with yeshiva education in New York, I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes, that was quite a piece in the Times a couple of weeks ago.
It actually mimics very closely a piece a friend of mine did for the Jewish Week about 7 years ago. And the stuff has been known for an extremely long time. But like with everything in New York, where it's extreme, it's very corrupt.
Sure.
It's just, I mean, I dealt with the NYPD for a long time and Brooklyn DA. And it would make your head spin to see some of that stuff. To have there was a potential murder case that I covered, and I was able to show that a lot of procedure was not followed, so that the victim did not get the investigation that he deserved, and therefore the potential murderers were never looked at, and it was just written down as they were going to do it as a suicide, but they couldn't get away with it because there was too much information against it that I published. So they had it as a undetermined death for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And a senior NYPD, the top brass level NYPD person, told the New York Post in a front page story that credited me, a lot of it credited me, but he or she told the Post that I forget exactly what the words of the quote are, but it was basically, I hope they aren't doing what it looks like they're doing. And what they were doing, what it looked like is that at minimum they were saying, "Oh, look, the guy's a beggar, and nobody really cares about him, and we can just put it down as, suicide or something, and it won't count as a murder statistic, and will look better on paper." That at bare minimum is what was going on, but really there was a whole level of corruption past that was protecting people probably within the ultra-Orthodox community who may have been involved either with his death or with things that led up to his death that might not have been legal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anyway, but back to the original thing. So Failed Messiah happened because of my friend who, by the way, did not work for Chabad, but had ordination, had smicha.
Okay.
And had gone, the whole thing, all Chabad schools, and went away to yeshiva like everybody else did here, because there wasn't one here in days, and did all of the stuff that, all of those kids did. And so anyway, he also confirmed a lot of the child sex abuse stuff to me when I first started hearing about it. A few years later when I was reporting it, and I saw him at somebody's house, and I said, let me ask you a question. When you were in yeshiva, did you ever hear of anybody getting sexually abused in the mikveh? Remember, you're talking about high school age kids, basically.
Sure.
High school age kids. And he said, I don't know anybody who wasn't sexually abused in the mikveh. And he went on to tell me a string of stories that would make your hair stand up. And he's just looking at me. And I'm like, did you get therapy? Did anybody else get therapy? What? And he was like, therapy? What? I mean, just, some guy just touched me. I said, get the fuck off me. And that was it.
Oh my God.
And I tell a story about this guy, this happened to him, that happened to him. And it's like, and then I started checking around, and every person that I knew that had been willing previously to honestly tell me things, would either say it didn't happen to me, but it happened to a lot of people I know, or it happened to my kid, or it happened to two of my kids, or it happened to your friend's kids and he didn't tell you, go back and ask him again, whatever. And it was just hundreds of people.
Oh, just vile. I don't know how you stay, as part of a group when that kind of thing happens. And obviously it's happened in, many other religious settings as well. Has been it's documented over the years, but still, how do you stay a part of it when that happens to you? I don't understand.
I think first of all, there's a level of denial. You always say to yourself, the leader doesn't want it this way.
Right.
And if you know that the leader does want it this way, and I have to stress that I have no evidence of that. Okay. But assuming for the sake of argument that I had that evidence before I was pushed out, excommunicated, or however you want to call it, I probably would have said, the people would have said, if they knew about it, that there had to be a reason for it that was valid. It's circular reasoning. It's like you shoot an arrow at a barn, and then you come over with a can of paint and draw a circle around it and scream bullseye, right? Yeah. It's whatever is will become correct. So there has to be something that makes this correct. I'd like to think that I would have walked over that, but I didn't have the information at that point.
No, of course.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, so many times you have people who are more mad at you for uncovering it. And I think that sort of parallels a lot of the response to the New York Times with the education story that ran at the beginning of or middle of September of people being angry. They're mad at the messenger, not the message.
Well, first of all, that's kind of there's a kind of thing in human nature where you you're being threatened by the information.
Right.
You can't refute the information because you don't know enough, because it's too complex, because it's too overwhelming, whatever it happens to be. But you know that the outside is attacking your inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the normal human response, if you haven't been trained not to do it, is to lash out at the person doing this to you, right? So that's the idea of smearing the messenger or whatever, is, I think, comes from just a natural psychological response to that kind of threat. But once it continues past that, I mean, once you're sitting there and you know for sure that the information is overwhelmingly true and that these people are not saying Jews are bad, then maybe you should stop and reassess your beliefs, right?
Right.
And then you get into cognitive dissonance. And because the cognitive dissonance for people is so high, they're just not going to do that. And then they redouble their efforts to attack the outside, attack the messenger, and build the wall up around themselves higher. And so that's what they do. Now, when you add to that the general behavior within ultra-Orthodoxy, including Chabad, and people don't see this because you're seeing, when you have contact with Chabad here, you're getting the front edge, outside, forward-looking, friendly part of Chabad.
Right.
You're not getting what really goes on when you get into deep into a Chabad community someplace with a lot of members and where the forward-looking outreach is happening, but it's happening under a much more controlled level. I mean, as an example of that, one of the members of the Chabad Beit Din, religious court in Jerusalem, was at the Kotel one night in the 90s when I lived in Jerusalem, worked for Chabad in the Old City. And he was a guy in his 70s or at that point. And there was a Baal Tshuva musician, a guy who had not been Orthodox and became Orthodox. And he was the valedictorian, I think, of Berklee College of Music. Great guitar player, nice guy. And he had some money and he had a custom-made silk Shabbos kind of kaftan made that was purple, and it had a big Magen David on it with I think it was originally going to be a guitar, but maybe it morphed into a sword. I mean, it had all this stuff on it and embroidered into it. It was really a beautiful thing. And he wore it to the Kotel to pray Friday night. And the guy in the Chabad Beit Din saw the Magen David with the stick coming out of it and thought it was a cross, that it was a Star of David on a cross. So he thought, therefore, this meant the guy was a Christian missionary. Now, I just like to point out that if you're going to that if Christian missionaries would show up at the Kotel wearing giant crosses and say, please convert to Christianity, as much as I would not like that, it's a lot better than showing up in evidently Jewish garb, covering up your Christian beliefs and your Christian roots, and trying to get people naively to come over to your house for a meal where you're going to convince them to believe in Jesus, right?
Right.
One is at least open and honest, and the other one is deceptive and awful. And it's usually the deceptive and awful, which is how we're approached as a community. But anyway, so knowing none of this, because he lives in Jerusalem and he's inside a very Chabad community in a very Haredi area where he doesn't really meet people, he's operating the way Chabad operated always, unless it was in this kind of a situation we have now in America, where we're interacting with a lot of non-religious Jews or Jews who are not Orthodox. So anyway, what happens is he sees this, he freaks out, he picks up a chair, runs over to the guy. Now, thank God these are plastic chairs, but he runs over to the guy and he throws the chair at him, screaming that you get out of here, you missionary, you whatever. And he's like, going totally berserk. And people are jumping on there are people jumping in to protect the guy. There are people who don't know who the guy is. They're jumping to try to punch the guy. All this stuff is going on. and I came right as this was happening, and I'm in shock. My friends are in shock. The people who I know who have worked at the Kotel every day for decades doing, the Chabad fill-in thing and whatever, and some of them are there and they're in shock. I'm watching this, and I didn't hear everything that happened right at the beginning. And I said to one of the Chabad shluchim that happened to be there, it was a friend of mine. I said, not paraphrasing here. I said, "What the fuck is going on?" and he looked at me and he said, "Well, everybody knows what Chabad really is now." Okay, that's what he said. It's and he had to be like dragged. This little 79-year-old rabbi and rabbinic court judge had to literally be dragged out of there while he was,
it's not a great look.
No, but so the point is the Chabad that you see here and most other places that you read about in newspapers that you might have had a Shabbos meal with once, or your kid knows them from a college campus or whatever. They're the ones who are very forward facing and have a ton of training in how to deal with people who are outside of the Chabad community and that you want to bring inside the Chabad community, or at least get to support it financially. They grow up basically doing this. There are kids that are 8, 9 years old that are participating in that type of missionary outreach.
Right.
Regularly. It's like the mother's milk for them. And of course, the benefit to this is that, I have my disagreements strongly with Chabad, but they're, like any other group, most people are very nice. And if you can get through the throwing chairs at people and all the other impulses that actually really exist, but you don't get to see them unless you're deeper inside. So if you can get through all of that and you're not actually dependent upon them for equal treatment or fair treatment in terms of community institutions and influence and whatever, if you're able to tolerate those problems, there are a lot of nice people.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been, 18 years since you started the site, 6 years since you've sold it. It doesn't sound like you've lost any of your edge when it comes to talking about this world.
Well, I did for a while, I have to say. I didn't read about it. I didn't read any of the other news websites coming out of ultra-Orthodoxy for a few years. I didn't follow things. I didn't look back at my site for a very long time. What's left of it, I didn't look back at that. It was like having PTSD, and I just couldn't. By the time I was putting in 12 to 15 hours a day, basically on it, 6 days a week for almost the entire time I had it. It was only the first few months, and then Chabad hacked me and took the site down. And then I had and through some help, thankfully, of a lot of nice people who I didn't know, but from the whole spectrum of Orthodoxy, but primarily from YU, I was able to very quickly narrow down how it had happened and basically who had done it, and then have a little what in the secular world would be a come to Jesus moment with them. And that most of it was the person I was speaking with begging me not to call the FBI and be telling them, "Oh, you're late on that, dude. I already did that."
Yeah.
And just having the guy totally panicked. But but until that point, I was putting in, a few hours a day.
Right.
Mostly just learning how to do stuff. But by 2006, I was putting in probably 15 hours almost every day. And that wasn't 15 hours straight necessarily, but I used to have to get up in the middle of the night almost every night check to see what was happening and base it. So if something was happening in France or whatever, I had to get up to make sure that I saw what was going on. When the terror attack happened in India, if you remember, what was that? 2000? God, this is terrible. 2008.
I think so. 2008, 2009, maybe.
Yeah. So I worked 3 days straight with like 25-minute naps 1 or 2 times a day through that whole thing. And I was communicating with people who were on the ground there, with people who knew the Chabad Shaliach and his wife very well and had been their friends, who were other places in the world now, but were, sending constant information and constant updates on what was going on, what they were hearing, and, people who knew the family, members of the family. I mean, and I did that for 3 days because even though I was at that point very clearly not connected directly to Chabad anymore, but a lot of Chabad people read my website, and I wanted to make sure that they got the most accurate information possible on what was going on, and that they weren't dependent on regular news organizations that would confuse because of they confuse names, they confuse people, they confuse because it's an emerging situation. And it's one thing if you're in an emerging situation and you're trying to decide if it's Bob Henry or Henry Bob, that the person is just yelling was shot, right?
Right.
It's a wholly different thing if it's Mendelssohn or Mendel Schneerson,
Right.
and you have no idea what they're saying, and you've got 5 different languages going on, and so it gets much harder to have accurate information. But it's certainly not the kind of thing that you don't. No responsible media organization is going to print somebody's name. Correct. Unless they know he's really dead, and generally that somebody's had the chance to notify the family. So, but in this kind of environment where you had a lot of ultra-Orthodox publications, internet-only publications, trying to cover the story and not having any ethical background in how to do it, so they could stray into that kind of thing. I mean, totally innocently. They're not, when it comes to that kind of stuff, there's not any that I'm aware of, any ill intent to, we're going to do it. We don't care if it hurts the family because we want to be the first with the story. I never saw that with something like this. Other things, but not with something like this. But still, they're handicapped because they don't have the background. And there weren't, it was just a very difficult story to cover. So I just stayed up and did it.
So I want to go sort of way back, about 40 or so years ago. One of the things that you had brought it up, but it really seems to have put a wedge between you and Chabad, was Ethiopian Jewry and their plight in the 1980s. What was it about that story and that situation that pushed you to advocate so strongly for them?
Ironically, my parents played a role in that. They went to a small program at Temple of Aaron probably around 1978, maybe, about Ethiopian Jews, and we were members there, but they usually didn't go to anything like that. But they went to this, and they had to hunt around to find where the program was. There were only tiny little signs sort of like taped up pointing out where to go. It was in a classroom up on the second floor, I think. Everything possible was done so that people would not find it or would understand that it wasn't endorsed. And only a handful of people were there. And I believe Rabbi Raskus wasn't there, and none of the official staff were there, of the rabbinical or cantorial staff. And it was basically this poor Ethiopian guy that was speaking was basically treated like a piece of crap. And that bothered my parents a lot. And they came home and told me about it. And And then shortly after that, I got involved in the movement to try to save Ethiopian Jews. And I became close to Grainham Berger, who was the president of the American Association for Ethiopian Jews. He was based in Pelham, New York. And so I became close with him and with some other people from the organization, and used to call them regularly for updates and to hear what was going on, and to try to do what I could do on college campus on the University of Minnesota to try to help if there was a way to do it in the community. They asked me to take a letter that had been smuggled out of Ethiopia that had been signed by a number of Kessim, the rough equivalent of a rabbi for Ethiopian Jews. Anyway, was discussing the persecutions they were going through and how unsettled their life was, and a whole long section about women being raped and girls being raped, and just that things were very, very bad and they needed help to get out. And I was asked to bring it to all the rabbis in the Twin Cities. And so I started to try to do that. And the Reform Rabbi Lee Lerner was, I think, already aware of the letter and was receptive. I wouldn't say he was jumping up and down and trying to do the most he could. I don't have any evidence of that. But he was receptive and nice. Raskus was what Bernie was like, which was cold and almost nasty in the very brief interaction I had with him. So Bernie was hostile over the Ethiopian Jewry thing, and controlled hostile. Not like
Sure.
They're black, get out of here or something, but very sophisticated, but very cold and not helpful. And I went to Rabbi Feller because I was working in a clothing store, Brown's Clothing, downtown Minneapolis, which is a famous institution in the Jewish community, by the way.
Okay.
And anybody older than 60 probably got their bar mitzvah suit at either Nate's or Brown's Clothing.
That's fantastic.
And Brown's, that was owned by a Jewish family. And the owner at that point, Eugene, was a donor to Chabad. And so Rabbi Feller used to pop in there pretty frequently to, get donations or maybe a bridge loan to cover something for a few days or whatever. And so everybody knew him. And I had never met him. And I was, even though I lived 6 blocks from Chabad House in those days. And so I was working, and he walked in, and the other salespeople, whispering under their, as low as they could. And, there's the rabbi getting money from Eugene again, And I asked who he was, and they told me. And these were mostly not Jewish guys. And I said, hang on. And I grabbed my little briefcase that I carried with me to school and to then to work. And I ran into the elevator after Rabbi Feller and rode up with him to Eugene's office. And in the elevator, I said, I have this letter and I want to give it to you, and I'd like you to read it. And if we could talk about it for a couple of minutes after you read it. And he said, I'm busy now, but I'd like to, I don't remember if he took a copy and then said, I want you to come to my office, or exactly what, or come to the office with the letter. I don't recall which. I think it was come to the office with the letter. Then we made an appointment, and I went to his office. And he would, completely honest, you put on tefillin, I'll read the letter. So I said, fine. I'd like to. I said, I'd like to. I said, I have a pair at home I got for my bar mitzvah. I don't remember how to put them on. Maybe you can show me so I'll remember. And so Rabbi Feller almost collapsed when I said that, because in Minnesota, the general response from people was either what are tefillin, or why you make me do this, or I put them on, once a week already. Don't mess with me or something, right? So he showed me using his tefillin, and I put them on, and I said Shema and whatever. And he was reading the letter. Yeah, and he was reading the letter. That's how I recall it. And I looked up, and he was crying. And so he said, what do you want me to do? And I said, well, we like to get as much support as possible to, to get them out of Ethiopia, to get them to preferably to Israel, and to help them now so that they don't have to go through this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd like the Rebbe to get involved to help save them. So he said that he would send that letter to New York, and he would talk to one of the Rebbe's assistants, and that's how they used to communicate. You never spoke to the Rebbe directly on the phone. So, and he would try, and then it became a month or so of waiting, and there was no answer. And finally, I said to him, I came in one day, and I had gotten a pushka from him, a little charity box from him.
Sure.
A nickel in or something before you put on tefillin or whatever. So, and I put the pushka down on the desk in front of him, and I said, I can't have this anymore, and I can't, come around anymore for things, because if the Rebbe can't answer a question about saving the lives of Jews, especially when we're this close to the end of the Holocaust, and we know what it was like for people to be stuck in places where they knew they were going to be killed and nobody was helping them. I said, I just cannot, I can't participate in something like this. So he asked me to just hold off a little longer. And he said he would call New York again, and he did. And then I got a general kind of answer that the Rebbe said I should, work on helping the local community. And so I'm conflating two instances. No, I forgot what he said the first time. The first time was something like that, but it might have been, it might have even been less specific than that. And so I was pretty pissed off and waited a bit, and then things got worse. And the American Association for Ethiopian Jews really wanted to get Chabad involved, just like they wanted to get everybody else, but any Jewish organization, to at least get them to say these people should be saved, because the more political weight behind saving them, the better chance it was that somehow they would be rescued. And so I wrote the letter to the Rebbe that basically said, look, Chabad did this for Iranian Jews, and it did this for Soviet Jews, and it's doing this for Iranian Jews now. It's, issuing student visas to schools that don't exist, and it's doing. Why won't you do this for Ethiopian Jews? That was part of what the first letter was asking for, I think, was that. So if you're not doing it for Ethiopian Jews, why aren't you doing it? And I sent the letter to him, to the Rebbe, and didn't get an answer. And after a bit, I told Rabbi Feller, that's it. I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore. It's like, it's the closest equivalent to the Holocaust we've had since the Holocaust. And if that's how the Rebbe's going to respond, then I can't participate. That's when I said that. And he said, let me call and talk to Rabbi Krinsky again and see what happens. And he called, and so a few days later, a week later, whatever it was, I heard that the Rebbe had said that I should concentrate on helping the local shluchim, the local Chabad rabbis, do what they do and help the local Jews, and that it would be difficult for me to have any effect outside of Minnesota, so I shouldn't worry about it, basically, paraphrasing it. And so that was the letter. But I didn't see the letter. I only got a very compact paraphrase of it that eliminated all the really bad stuff. Okay. And so that's, for 20 years, that's what I thought the Rebbe had said. And I was plenty pissed at it, but, and it was clear to me that even then that the Rebbe's answer was bullshit. But I thought that, with his standing and with being supposed to be so smart, and with the supposed Sorbonne degrees and University of Berlin, and speaks 7 languages and all these other things that turn out not to be true. It's all false, right? He had none of those degrees. It's a complete lie. And he didn't really speak 7 languages. He was barely fluent in anything more than the language he grew up speaking. Meaning Yiddish and Rabbinic Hebrew, which shifts easy into modern Hebrew if you practice a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And then he learned how to speak enough English to communicate, but he wasn't really fluent in anything.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.